Today we're going to talk about writing the equation from a piecewise graph. And so we're going to start here with this one. And so we're going to look at each section. So we're going to look at this as one piece, and this is another piece. And so I'm going to start with the purple. So we want to start by writing our function. So f of x equals, and then if we look at the purple, that's up at right here at y is 3, and it's a constant function, so our function for that is just 3. And then our domain is going from -5, and it's including, so it's less than or equal to x, which is then less than or equal to -1. Because we're going from x is -5 here to x is -1 there, with closed circles on each end. So now if we go to the red function here, we're going to want to notice that we have a positive slope of 1 here, and we cross through the y-axis at -2, so we can say it's going to be x minus 2, and that's going from x is -1 here to x is 3 here. We have an open circle at -1, so it's going to be -1 is less than x, and then we have a closed circle here, so it's less than or equal to 3. Now if we come over here, we actually have 3 sections to this graph. So we have one section right there, one section here, and one section there. So if I start with the red function, we're going to have f of x equals, and so we want to notice we have a slope of 1 here, and then if we were to continue that slope, we would cross the y-axis at 5 right there, so it's going to be x plus 5. And so then we go from x is -4 to x is -1 with a closed circle at -4 and an open circle at -1. Now if we go to the purple function here, we're up at just a constant function here at y equals 4, so it's just 4, and we're going from -1 to +1 with open circles on each end. And then if we go to our green function here, we have a negative slope of 1 if you look there, and if we were to continue back, we would cross at 5, so it would be -x plus 5, and we're going from x is 1 to x is 3 with an open circle at 1 and a closed circle at 3. So now if we go here, we have one piece right there and another piece right there. So we want to write f of x equals, if I start with the green here, this is a quadratic function starting at the origin, and there's up 1 over 1 to start, which means this is just our parent function of x squared. We're going from its arrow, tells us we're going to -infinity, and we're going up to x is 1 with a closed circle, so that's telling us x is less than or equal to 1. Now for the purple function, we have a slope of up to over 1 here. If we were to continue that back, we would cross the y-axis at +1, so that's going to be 2x plus 1. And then we have an open circle at x is 1, and x in this arrow tells us we're going to +infinity, so it's x is greater than 1. So again, f of x equals, we have an absolute value function right here, and then our linear function right there. So if I start with the absolute value function in purple, it's reflected upside down, so it's going to be a negative absolute value. So negative absolute value, the slope is 1 in each direction, and so it's just the negative absolute value of x. We're not shifting left or right because we're still on the y-axis, and then it's shifting up 3. And so we're going from x is -2 with a closed circle to x is +2 with an open circle. Now for the red, we have a negative slope of 2, We have an arrow, which tells us we're going to infinity. And so this is, if we were to continue this back, we cross the y-axis at 2, so it's going to be a negative 2x plus 2. And then we're going here from x is 2 to infinity, so I have a closed circle there, so it's going to be x is greater than or equal to 2. Now over here, we have one piece right there, and another piece right here. So we're going to say f of x equals, we're going to start with the red function, which is a line, and so this has a positive slope of 2 and goes through the origin, so our line is just 2x. We're going from x is 0 to negative infinity, so there's an open circle at 0 there, so it's going to be x is less than or equal to 0. And now we have a quadratic that's been transformed, so in parentheses we're going to say, okay, x, it's shifting right 2, so it's going to be x minus 2 squared, and we did not shift up at all, so that's it. And then we're going from x is 0 with an open circle to an arrow, which is infinity, so it's x is greater than 0. So now if we come down here, we have g minus f of 10, which means g of 10 minus f of 10. And so if we find g of 10, we're going to go over to g of x here. At x is 10, we're right here, and so that's at y is negative 3. And so we know that this is negative 3 minus, and then f of 10 is right here, and that's at negative 5. So minus negative 5. So negative 3 plus 5 because of the double negative, and that equals positive 2 as our final answer. And then here we have f times g of 6. It's saying f of 6 times g of 6. And so if we go evaluate f of 6, at x is 6, we're right here at negative 5, times, now we go to g of 6, and so at x is 6, we're right here at positive 1, and so negative 5 times 1 is negative 5 as our answer. Now down here, we're going to start on the inside. So we have the inverse of f at x is negative 3. And so if you remember from last year or from Math 3, the inverse function is the switched x and y of the original function. So that means that this is going to be y in f of x. And so if we go to f of x and go to y is negative 3, right here, we're there, so we're at x is 4. So that tells us that this is going to be 4. So then we're going to evaluate g of 4. And so at x is 4, we're right here, and so it's at y is 3. And so now, if we keep going, we're at x equals 4. So we're going to start on the inside, and we're going to replace this x with 4 and evaluate g of f of 4. And so if we go to f of 4, we're at y is negative 3. And so this is going to be 3g times 2 times negative 3 plus 1. And now order of operations, we're going to do 2 times negative 3, so it's 3g negative 6 plus 1, and then negative 6 plus 1 tells us that we have 3g of negative 5. And so now we're going to evaluate g of negative 5. So if we go to negative 5 right here, we're there, so we're at y is negative 2. And so this gives us 3 times negative 2, which is negative 6. And it says, on what intervals is f of x increasing? And so if you remember from last unit, increasing is when our slope is positive. And so it's increasing right there and that's the only point where our slope is positive, and so we want to use our x values. And so we're going from x is -5 right here to x is 0 right here. I'm going to write that using an interval, so we're going from -5 to 0, and you remember you always want to use parentheses when talking about increasing and decreasing. And then if we go over here, what is the absolute maximum value of g of x? So remember, maximums are when you have some sort of hilltop, mountaintop, something like that. And so if we come up here to g of x, we have the maximum y value is at y equals 4, but there's several x values in there. So we're just going to say it's at y equals 4 with no specific x value. And so because of the fact that there's no specific x value, there actually would be no maximum on g of x.